apologize that you'll have to bear with me for a few minutes, listen to my speaking. I'm very new at this, so I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all, and I thank you, Kyle, as well, for giving me the opportunity. I'm very much at the initial stages of learning how to do this. I've done it a few times in different circumstances, but this is like the first time I really talked to like just an adult class before, so give me all the critiques you can. I really would appreciate it, but go ahead and open up in your Bibles to Acts 25 for me. We'll be starting there. We finished up with Acts 24 last week. And to kind of recap with what's been going on in Acts, we've seen from the beginning of the church starts in Jerusalem when the Holy Spirit comes upon the apostles, and it starts spreading out to the surrounding regions, into Samaria and Judea, and then it starts getting a bit bigger. It starts going out to the rest of the world, right? And we're introduced to a character named Saul, who, as we know, later becomes Paul, and that's the guy we're dealing with right now. What Paul has been doing, he's been kind of going around the Mediterranean. He's taken a few trips by now, and this most recent time, he's been trying to work his way down into Jerusalem, and he finally gets there, and what happens? He runs into some trouble, right? Does anyone know what he gets in trouble for?
Spreading the truth.
Yeah, he gets in trouble for spreading the truth, and he gets in trouble for that right after he's accused of trying to bring some Greeks into the temple, though, because he's coming down in Jerusalem. He's taking a vow. He's getting ready to preach the truth, but some rumors are spread, and he's like, hey, he's bringing some Gentiles into the temple, and Jews don't like that. So that's when they all go crazy and start rioting, and they're trying to kill him, stone him to death, and that's when this guy named Lysias comes in, the commander of the Romans, and saves Paul. He's like, I don't know who this guy is, but they're all beating up on him, and we need to figure out some answers. So Lysias is like, all right, man, what's going on? They're about to whip him or scourge him or whatever just to get some answers out of him, but he's like, I'm a Roman citizen, and Lysias gets a little scared because the rule is, if you're hurting a Roman citizen, you're in trouble. They have a right to a fair trial, and they have a lot of rights being a Roman citizen. That all happens in 23, and then in 24, Lysias, or later in chapter 23, Lysias sends him to a guy named Felix, the governor up in Caesarea. And who is Felix? Does anyone know? All right, so Felix is the governor of the province, the Roman governor, who is in charge of the area, basically making sure everything stays as it should under Roman rule. And he's the guy above Lysias, kind of running the show. And since Lysias doesn't know what to do with him, he's sending him to him, to which some of the Jews try and go kill Paul. He gets out of that by a big Roman escort taking him up there, and lo and behold, we get to 25. All right. One thing I do want to mention, so in 24, we kind of get a little insight into who Felix is. Yeah, let me go through this real quick. And this is the stuff we kind of covered last week. Felix is, like I said, the governor. In verse 22 of 24, though, it says, Felix has a bit of an exact knowledge about the way. Felix isn't just someone who doesn't know what's going on. He's kind of familiar with the Jews. He's a Gentile, but he understands somewhat of what's going on. And when Paul talks to him about, hey, this Jesus guy and what's going on, Felix doesn't really find anything wrong with him, does he? I mean, what has Paul done? Did Paul do anything wrong? Or is he innocent?
He's innocent.
He's innocent, yeah. Or what'd you say?
It's according to which side you're on.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. What kind of? So when the elders and the chief priests came up to talk to Felix, though, what were they saying he did? Did they have any proof that Paul had done anything wrong? No, he didn't. Exactly. So Felix already knows that, hey, this guy's innocent. And he really doesn't have any reason to hold him or keep him in custody. But what does Felix end up doing?
Sending him someplace else.
No, Felix actually just keeps him there, and we get
that.
that. That was Lysias. You had it. It's just the wrong person.
Yeah.
Let's see. In verse, let's start in verse 24 of Acts 24. We'll start there. But some days later, Felix arrived with Drusilla, his wife, who was a Jewess, and sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. And he was discussing righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come. Felix became frightened and said, "Go away for the present, and when I find time, I will summon you." At the same time, too, he was hoping that money would be given to him by Paul. Therefore, he used to send for him quite often and converse with him. But after 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and wishing to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul imprisoned. All right, so how long did he leave Paul in prison for?
2 years.
2 years, that's right. 2 years. And what had Paul done wrong? Once again, nada. But at this time, seems like Felix is getting a little short on cash. I think historically he had gotten involved with like some wrong groups or something. Basically, he got kind of resorted to like some scandals. Like he was trying to accept bribes to get kind of some cash flow going. But anyway, so that's kind of, he thought he could do that. I mean, which makes sense because Paul, he had been taking a big lump sum of money down to Jerusalem for all the Christians. I mean, he was a pretty well-known guy, and it seemed Felix had some sort of understanding of who he was. But anyway, all right, now we get to 25, sorry. All right, in verses, let's read verses 1 through 6. All right, Festus, therefore, having arrived in the province 3 days later, went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priest and the leading men of the Jews brought charges against Paul. And they were urging him, requesting a concession against Paul, that he might have him brought to Jerusalem, at the same time setting an ambush to kill him on the way. Festus then answered that Paul was being kept in custody at Caesarea, and that he himself was about to leave shortly. Therefore, he said, let the influential men among you go there with me, and if there's anything wrong about the man, let him prosecute him. And after he had spent not more than 8 or 10 days among them, he went down to Caesarea, and on that day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. All right, what's going on? We see a few people. We see Festus, we see the chief priests and Jews, the leading men of the Jews, and we see Paul. And what we see right now is Festus. Festus is the guy that is now the governor, right? He just took the place of this guy, Felix, who kept Paul in prison. So Festus is just now coming into this role, all right? He's very new to the job and everything. So he's kind of making his rounds. He may have come from, I don't remember where he comes from, but he goes to Jerusalem and he's kind of meeting everybody, kind of doing his thing. And, well, the chief priest, well, everyone's like, oh, we couldn't convince Felix, but this guy Festus, we might be able to convince him to get Paul, all right? So, what do? They go up to Festus, and they're like, hey, there's this guy, Paul. Can we get him killed? Because, not killed, just tried, but then kill him, which, where does that show their hearts? Does that show that those are some God-fearing people right there, doesn't it? No. Yeah, these people who hold the law are trying to get someone killed. Yeah, shows their hearts plainly, doesn't it? But it says that, what does he say? He says, hey, Paul's up there, I'm going up there, let's just all meet up there. So they don't even get to set an ambush again for him, which they did in the past. But it says in verse 6 that on the next day he, Festus, took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. All right, what is that word there, the tribunal?
That was their law.
Their law, yes. Exactly. It's like their judgment seat.
Kind of like our Supreme Court.
That's exactly right. And with we have different branches of government, but since he's the leader and stuff, as the leader, he could be the executive branch and the judicial branch in this case. So that's exactly right. So that's what he's doing. He's taking the seat of the judgment. He's like, all right, I'm wanting to make sure these guys are happy. let's go ahead and do this. I mean, it's only been, a few days after, I think it's like, maybe like 2 weeks, around 2 weeks after he's already been appointed. This is already going on. And then they're ordering Paul to be brought. All right, and let's start in verse 7. All right. And after he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him which they could not prove. And while Paul said in his own defense, I have committed no offense either against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, answered Paul and said, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand before me on these charges? But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as you also very well know. All right. Before we get into 11, what is, in verse 9, when Festus says he's wishing to do the Jews a favor, why is Festus wanting to do the Jews a favor?
Keep them sedated, they won't raise up, and he won't have to support, he won't have to put forth any force.
Exactly. Because what are the Jews known as among the Gentiles? They're kind of crazy. Kind of the rebellious bunch. Like, they think they're entitled to the world. Think they're better than everyone else, and they do dumb stuff. Like, hey, there's this random guy trying to walk into this building, and we're just going to kill him for it. That's a little crazy to them. But also, like, how long had Festus been in this position?
Couple weeks.
Couple weeks. He's a new,
Newbie.
I mean, you all have worked jobs, right? Like, how often do you go in there and you're just like, I'm not gonna do good? No, he's wanting to make a good impression, right? He's wanting to show them that hey, I'm trying to curry favor with them, and it's gonna make his job easier. He's trying to suck up to one side, so that's exactly what we're seeing. That's why he would want to do them a favor. But he's like, do you want to go to Jerusalem? But Paul's like, why do I need to go to Jerusalem? I haven't done anything wrong, which you already know. And he goes in verse 11, if I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything worthy of death and do not refuse to die, I do not refuse to die. But if none of those things are true of which these men accuse me, no one can hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar. What did Paul just do?
Well, he confirmed that the death penalty existed.
That's right.
And that it was not wrong in the eyes of God.
Yeah. Well, that may be true. However, I would counter that though. It's the Romans though. Are they godly people?
No, but God's rule is God's rule, period.
God's rule is God's rule, and God does say to submit to governing authorities, right?
Yes.
And this, we see plainly right here, Paul submitting to governing authorities, which is awesome, and it's something that we should definitely all take into account. But another reason why I think he's not afraid to just be like, I'm not afraid to face the death penalty is because, once again, what did he do wrong?
Nothing.
Didn't do anything wrong. So, when you're on the stand and you're just pretty confident, is Paul confident?
Yes.
Yeah. If he didn't do anything wrong, he can just be like, all right, I'm willing to die if I did, but since I didn't, it's a pretty powerful case, and Festus definitely sees that. But what did he do in relation to, what does appeal to Caesar mean?
Something a Roman citizen was allowed to do.
Yes. Exactly. Roman citizens had, and only Roman citizens, no one else, had the opportunity to appeal to Caesar, which basically just means go over his, sorry.
No, go ahead, finish.
Oh, okay. Basically just means go over his head. He's like, Festus was just made it obvious. He's like, I don't want to try you fairly. I know that you did nothing wrong, but I still want to condemn you, Festus is. So Paul is exercising his right of, all right, if you're not going to do your job, I'll go to someone else who will. And Festus says, you have to, he's like, all right, you appeal to Caesar you shall go. But what was it?
Well, I brought up Esther, for example, and her husband was the king. But the law was that if someone entered in the chamber that wasn't requested, and the king didn't put out a scepter to them, then they were to be executed. And she wasn't the first wife. The previous wife had been executed. And of course, this king had just lost a major battle, and so he was grumpy. He was angry and he was sulking.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was one of the big things. She was afraid to go in there for her life. And that's her husband. Caesars are not really known for their by-the-book judgment of the law. They're known for appealing to the rule of the people. And so they're a politician. We all know politicians, and they feel the room, and they can go into one audience, and you think they're pro this, and then they go into another audience, and now you think they're anti the thing they were pro of. And so Paul is appealing to go to Caesar, and he is saying, yes, Caesar can put me to death, and he knows he's innocent of anything deserving of death. But at the same time, he's appealing to a person that at his whim could say, well, this is how the people are speaking, and so, I'll put you to death because that's going to placate the people. But back to your point, though, Paul is still willing to die. He's not saying, look, he's saying the Jews don't have a right to put me to death. They don't have any legal right, and I'll defend myself against the Jews. But I will go to the governing authority that has the right to put me to death. Kind of like in the book of Daniel with the fiery furnace. You have every right to throw us in there, but we're still not going to obey. And so in this, he's kind of like this outward defiance. I will go appeal to Caesar, and what's his appeal? We talked about it yesterday, and you brought this up, and you were like, the appeal is that Christ is king, and he's serving Christ. So that can make Caesar mad, but Paul's still going to do that. And so that's a lesson for us, in that, yes, we're doing nothing wrong in following Christ, and people will be angry at that still, but we should be willing to incur their wrath, and possible harm, if we're going to be faithful to God. So,
no, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that also, to add on to that, if Paul didn't do anything wrong, what was the reason why were the Jews mad at him? What was he saying? Like, what was the truth he was preaching?
Paul didn't do, I don't know if I'm right or not, but they knew that what they called the way, he had turned to that. He was no longer persecuting the people of the way that they called.
And the way was Jesus, right?
With Jesus.
Yes, and what made Jesus special? That's the very end. He died, but he was raised again, which we'll see in just a second. That's going to be like the main focus of his argument. And
he was in the right all the way, and he wasn't going to say anything different.
yes. Actually, hold on to that. We're going to go right back to that, okay? All right, so let's start in verse 13, okay? Now, when several days had elapsed, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea and paid their respects to Festus. And while they were spending many days there, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, "There is a certain man left a prisoner by Felix. And when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priest and the elders of the Jews brought up charges against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation upon him. And I answered them that it is not the custom of the Romans to hand over any man before the accused meets his accusers face to face, and has an opportunity to make his defense against the charges. And so, after they had assembled here, I made no delay, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal, and ordered the man to be brought. And when the accusers stood up, they began bringing charges against him of such crimes I was not expecting. But they had simply some points of disagreement with him about their own religion and about a certain dead man Jesus, who Paul asserted to be alive. At being at a loss at how to investigate such matters, I asked whether he was willing to go up to Jerusalem there and stand on trial for these matters, but when Paul appealed to be held in custody for the emperor's decision, I ordered him to be kept in custody until I sent him to Caesar. And Agrippa said to Festus, I would also like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you shall hear him. All right, so going right back to that. When he's on this tribunal, and these guys, these chief priests and elders all start coming up and being like, hey, Paul, we don't like him, this, and this, and they don't have any evidence for whatever they're saying. But what we can gather from what Festus understands, he doesn't seem to be an understanding person of the way, right? That was the difference between Felix and Festus here. Felix did understand and kind of inquired about it. I mean, his wife Drusilla was a Jew, but Festus, he's just this random guy who I don't know what's going on. I was expecting maybe like some war crimes, but no. It seems that the only reason these guys were wanting this guy killed was differences in opinion. It's like, oh, go ahead.
Also, if the people had turned to the way, it would have pulled the limelight off of the Jewish leaders.
Oh, that's exactly right. And it goes back to where their hearts are, and the fact that even though they understood that there was a resurrected Jesus, they still weren't wanting to follow it or anything. It wasn't the Christianity they were expecting,
Power is
right?
money, money is power.
Exactly. They were more concerned about their power than what God wants, right? Seeking the approval of men rather than God. But yes, and it's with like this disagreement. You're standing on trial for. I'm going to use you. I'm so sorry. What's your favorite like snack food? Do you like Doritos? Okay, perfect. I love Doritos. All right.
Put him on the spot.
Yeah, you're welcome. Makes my job easier when I focus the attention on someone else. Yeah, anyway. It's like, this is a silly example, but like, I'm on trial for Doritos. Man, Doritos are awesome. You're like, absolutely not. We need to kill that guy. It's kind of what it is. It's a difference in opinion. And the thing is, everyone has differences in opinion. And it's funny because, like, even Festus, this is why Festus can see why there's no reason for there to be any sort of issue here. But so that's why he's talking to Agrippa. Who's King Agrippa now? It says he's a king, right? What do we know about this is actually King Herod Agrippa. Do you know, what do you think of when you think of King Herod? It's all right if you don't know. There were several Herods in the Bible. This Herod is the last one, actually, but Herod the Great was the one that tried to kill Jesus whenever he was a baby. His son, I don't remember which Herod Antipas maybe, but he was the one who killed John the Baptist, and now Herod Agrippa the first, not this one, Herod Agrippa the first was the one that killed James earlier in Acts, and also imprisoned Peter. But now we're at Herod Agrippa II, which is Herod Agrippa the first son, and he became king around 17 years old, and his sister is Bernice, and their relationship is very weird. It's an open scandal. It was an open scandal among Gentiles and Jews. It was it was incestuous, and they're just not very good people, but they were the ruling people of the Judea area. But King Agrippa, though, would have understood a lot of the old law. So that's why Festus may have been trying to talk to him about, like, hey, I don't know what's going on. Do you have some help with this? So that's what he's talking to him about. But which I had more to say on that, but since we're running short on time, I don't want to dive too deep on. But anyway. But yeah, so that's Agrippa, and he's basically someone who should know who these people are, or what's going on with this, and so that's why Festus is coming to him. All right. Let's go through verse 23. All right, and so, on the next day, when Agrippa had come together with Bernice, amid great pomp, and had entered the auditorium, accompanied by the commanders and the prominent men of city at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. All right, we see that Agrippa and Bernice says amid great pomp. What is pomp?
Grandeur.
Grandeur, yeah. It's like, do you have something?
It's like grandeur, it's fancy, it's high class.
Exactly. They're coming in with all their fancy robes and jewelry and stuff. I mean, just picture this, like, it's a big courtroom. Paul's trial is already over. They're just hearing him out, so I want that to be clear. But they're coming in, and it says that he was brought in by some of the commanders, which I think the commanders here, I did some studying on that. These aren't just like centurions. These are like the ones that are like over like thousands. So I think there was, about 5 5 of those in the area at the time. But anyway, so like a lot of Roman guards, a lot of grandeur around these people, and here comes Paul. And what does Paul look like? He's in chains. He's a little Jewish man, maybe balding, I don't know. It kind of just shows the atmosphere. But what do you think, one thing I want you to consider though, what do you think Paul's attitude was? Do you think he was intimidated?
No. He
No?
was confident
He was. Why?
because he had God on his side.
That's exactly right. Amid the governor, amid King Agrippa, who's all in control?
God.
God. All right. Question for you all. How intimidated are you all to stand in front of people? Yeah. In such a big contrast in this passage, how do we even run across kings in our time?
No.
No.
So would you run across presidents, senators, congresspeople, stuff like that?
That's a really good comparison though. It's like standing in front of the president right now in some regards, or he's going to, I would say Caesar's probably the president, but yeah, that's exactly right. And which Paul would have known some of this. It was back in Acts 9 that he was told that you're going to be standing in front of kings, right? But how intimidated are we to just talk to our everyday man? How intimidated are we whenever we see people who have more than us, just to tell them the straight up truth, which is all it really boils down to is that, hey, a man is now alive who was dead.
Yeah.
That's what everything hinges on. Because if that didn't happen, Paul wouldn't even be in the mess he is in. Let's go ahead and finish up by reading 24 through 27. And Festus said, King Agrippa, and all you gentlemen here present with us, you behold this man about whom all the people of the Jews appealed to me, both at Jerusalem and here, loudly declaring that he ought not to live any longer. But I found that he had committed nothing worthy of death, and since he himself appealed to the emperor, I decided to send him. Yet I have nothing definite about him to write to my lord. Therefore, I have brought him before you all, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after the investigation has taken place, I may have something to write. For it seems absurd to me in sending a prisoner not to indicate also the charges against him. And that's where we're going to kind of drop off there. He doesn't have anything, that's why he's seeking Agrippa's help. He's like, I need your insights, because I don't know much about this. Can you give me some reasons on why I'm sending him up there? But yeah, I'd say, think to yourself though, where am I intimidated? Where is my estimation of faith? Paul's, it seems to be in God. If he was able, through God, to have the boldness to stand in front of these people, to stand up for truth, and to have the boldness to say it, I honestly don't think Paul thought they were any more important than the rest of them, because, once again, we're all sinners and fall short of the glory of God, right? And we're about to see him give his account on how he falls into that category too. But we'll cover that next week. But I really do appreciate y'all giving me this opportunity. I know it just means a lot to me. So anyway.
All right.